So maybe we just do a quick introduction of yourself. So you've been working in video for quite a while. I think you came out of the kind of theater school, if I heard or read that correctly.
Yes,
and then
I did.
Kind of came into the agency world through Distilled, and then Vistia, and now you're freelance.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Cool. So can you talk a bit about like how that kind of came about, that you came from theater into SEO and then into video?
Yeah, sure. So for me, it started, I was working in theater and film for a while. And just after I graduated university, and obviously that industry doesn't have a huge amount of money and a few other issues with it. So I essentially ended up working for a company that did some technology behind satellite television. And I was working in that field for a while, kind of doing the real technical side of video creation and distribution. And then from there, I got in touch with an agency called Distilled, who were working at the company, who was a client of the company I was working for, and was really interested by what they were doing. It seemed like a great company. And then I went to work there, and I realized that I understood the very technical side of video. I then learned the marketing side, and I also knew all the kind of creative side from my past career. So I had these three things that not many people had in combination. And that meant that I was able to kind of bring a kind of new perspective to video marketing, I think, from quite a bunch of different lenses. And that sort of became the way in which I was able to build a career in this space, I suppose. And then from there, kind of started speaking and talking and writing about video, and then got to know the guys at Wistia and went to work there for kind of 5 years and did a bit of consulting as well. And and now this year I've just been kind of doing my own thing.
Cool. Yeah, actually, let me quickly pull up Wistia here. So what did Wistia do actually, and what did you do at Wistia? So your title was like brand and marketing strategist, if I read that right.
Yes.
And so what does a brand and marketing strategist do?
Yeah, so I did quite a few different things at Wistia over the years, but mostly around kind of the essential marketing strategy. So what to create, how to distribute it, I also kind of did the website rebuild there, help with the product marketing, so the framing of all the products for the different users, and understanding how we can kind of speak to the audience and understand like how to pitch the different problems that they were solving. So yeah, kind of did a bit of that, and then worked on some of the like content distribution strategy for a lot of the video content that Wistia did, including a piece called 110-100 that was a kind of longer form piece of content that we did a couple of years ago, and after that a piece called Brandwagon. So kind of was running essentially the brand marketing side for Wistia, so the PR, the overall framing and pitching, the kind of what do we create to speak to our audience, and how do we kind of like really build that audience base, and working with a great creative team there as kind of the marketing expert, I suppose.
Let's jump in maybe right there. So I named this workshop a bit tongue in cheek, a bit like how to generate leads, with videos.
Oh, sure.
Because probably when you're a freelancer or an agency, people come to you with these kind of questions, right? How do I generate more leads? Or how do I get more revenue? Or how do I increase my audience? Like, what are questions, if I come to you and I ask you, hey, how do I generate more leads? Like, what are the first questions where you back up a little bit, and like, what kind of questions do you ask?
So I think, I'm always like, if you're trying to work out how to do video, I think the core thing that most companies get wrong is they sort of try to think about it as a separate process to the rest of the content strategy. So it's like, we're going to create a video asset, and then we're going to try and get the most bang for our buck from it. And it doesn't really work that way. So video is a media type like text or image, and you need to start to think of it as an integral part of your marketing communication. So what you don't do is come up with an idea, create it, and then distribute it. You need to kind of think distribution first in terms of where it's going, what the purpose of it is, what the overall approach is, and then you can start to create stuff that's going to really meet those goals. So I'm always kind of, I think when people come initially, it's always about stepping back and go, okay, well, what channels are we dealing with? What assets do we have? Who our audience is obviously the main kind of thing that you need to know to make that work. And then start to really develop the content strategy off the back of the goals and the distribution targets. So, for me, it's always about, people tend to think like creation, or strategy, creation, distribution, measurement. And I always then flip it and end up, okay, let's start with measurement, then we'll work out distribution, then we'll think about the strategy and the creation part.
Right. So if we would say like, okay, I come to you and I say like, hey, what I want to measure is, the number of leads, let's say qualified leads that actually come in through video content. Like, what would be kind of the first step that we would think about together?
Well, the first step is going to be, tying your video data to your CRM. If you're thinking in terms of lead acquisition as in like a, B2B marketing, growth marketing sort of mentality, it's all about the data. So you got to tie everything and tie the video playback data. You then need to think about, starting some lead thresholds for content consumption. So what are we going to define as a qualified lead, and probably how are we going to differentiate a lead versus like a fan. So if you think about the way that video works and the way that people might be, if you're creating a lot of stuff, there's going to be a differentiation between people who are really engaged with your content and consuming it. And that's very useful for your business, for your brand, a lot of stuff, versus the people who are like qualified lead. And you need to kind of differentiate those two and build almost two qualification funnels that sits side by side. That one that kind of talks about the level of engagement with brand, and one that talks about the level of engagement with product or potential revenue acquisition, I guess. So it's about like differentiating those and then sort of trying to tie the two together. So the main metrics you're going to look at doing are, like the amount of videos watched, how much of each video has been watched, whether they've given a permission asset on a specific video. So if you've like gated a piece of longer content that you wanted to use as lead generation. So it's essentially, thinking about it in those terms. You also, if you're thinking in terms of lead gen, need to start to differentiate your strategy based on channel. So, you can't measure your content on YouTube the way you can on your website. Right. So you need to think about, okay, well, what's the purpose of YouTube? How are we going to then drive people from YouTube to our owned media asset that we can then, use as a way of generating leads and tracking stuff. So you then have metrics on YouTube that relate to that. So it's far more about, where the traffic come from, where did they go afterwards, and that sort of stuff. So each channel that the video is on is measured differently as well.
And also, you kind of started talking about this, right? So a lot of what happens on YouTube is like audience building, basically, and it's kind of a borrowed channel in a way. So how do you get people from a place like YouTube to your website or to your blog? What are some best practices there that you see clients implementing with success?
Yeah. So essentially, the correct attitude is to think of YouTube in exactly the same way that like media companies do. So if you are Netflix, what you do is you have all your assets that you charge for on an owned platform. And these are like where you really want people to go and where the good stuff is. But you use YouTube for clips and trailers and all those sorts of things that can kind of build the interest, build the audience that you then basically promise better stuff if they leave the platform and go elsewhere. So it's about having that like value proposition on the YouTube channel that is about, providing some value, but not giving everything away. And then having that bigger value proposition on your own channel that you can then, drive people from casual fans on terms of your YouTube channel and then, really engage fans elsewhere. And the error is if you essentially treat the two channels as the same and just say, well, we really want to build an audience on YouTube, and that's fine. Because if you really build the audience primarily there, then you are stuck into that ecosystem. You're never going to get people out. And also, like for most companies doing any form of like growth marketing or lead gen tends to be B2B. They tend not to have like a great YouTube channel offering. Like it's just not what they do. So I would just not think about worrying about YouTube as a major channel for you. Think of it as like a supporting channel to your website rather than like a major place to build an audience.
Right. And so what have you seen actually? I mean, still, when you think about demand gen in general, there is this kind of audience building happening also where word of mouth comes into play. And so, you mentioned doing little clips on YouTube, but maybe also on LinkedIn or something like that. What have you seen specifically for LinkedIn as kind of a funnel? I mean, let's take a podcast like this as an example. So let's say I'm a B2B brand, and I would kind of put this into little clips and then upload it in several places. What would the next step be? Like, I would then go funnel them onto a blog or onto a website, and I would ask for an email there, or like what have you seen? What works best?
Related to LinkedIn specifically, or just in general?
Yeah, let's take LinkedIn as an example. I think a lot of B2B companies are present there.
Okay, sure. So LinkedIn, I think, like for me, LinkedIn is really not a very good marketing channel for businesses. What it is a good marketing channel for is individuals, like pushing their own personal brand. So I think it tends to work if you've got like an in-house influencer in your company, or you have someone, maybe it's a CEO or whoever, who's like able to use LinkedIn to build up their audience there, and they're marketing themselves. So you can utilize that to then maybe if they're hosting a podcast, like they then start to promote it. They do that regularly. The guest promotes it on theirs, all that kind of thing. So you have a bit of a way to build the initial interest there. Then, as you mentioned, yes, you then want to take them off platform, so away from LinkedIn. Maybe you just give a snippet of it, or you pull them elsewhere, so they can then go to the website and actually there have that engagement that you can properly measure, one that you can drive traffic, that you can exactly. If you gate the content, if you put like an email subscription box on top of the content, usually a few minutes in, so not right at the beginning, but sort of mid-roll. So after, so it pops up. So once people are already engaged, you're going to get a higher conversion rate. So then you want to put your email address capture form and get the email in order to generate the lead that way. So that's one way you can, from soup to nuts, go from LinkedIn all the way to a qualified lead, if you like. But the strategy is at every point in that journey, you want to start to speak to people where they are. Now, on LinkedIn, people are quite comfortable to leave it because it's kind of crappy platform, and people are just going, I don't know, they're going on there for whatever reason, but they're quite happy to jump off and see other stuff. YouTube less so, because people are not normally going on YouTube to just like browse. They are going for a
discover platform. Yeah.
So you have to kind of think about the audience experience and speak to them where they are, and then create that like minimum viable conversion, that next action, that smallest next action that drives them to the next stage in your journey, whatever it might be.
I think you touch on an important point there, because when you say you want to meet the people where they are, it's basically the very first thing is like kind of picking who you're actually speaking to in a video, right? And then figuring out where they hang out. So when clients come to you and you kind of figure out together to pick a niche or to pick a segment of customers to serve for video, like what kind of process do you go through?
Yeah, so for me, it's all about like identifying a few different segments. So it's like, okay, who are your customers? Who are your best customers? Who are your kind of amplifiers? Who are the people that really like maybe aren't your customers but really help share your stuff, and are the people who tend to be like big voices in that community? Who are the kind of the subcultures in the community surrounding your brand? Like, what are those worlds that people are speaking in? And then who are like your nerds? Who are the people within your company who are like experts in a specific esoteric thing that there is a community around that you can then marry the two? So you can then say, well, here is this expert on this particular topic. How can we then get their knowledge to this community? And that is essentially the approach that I take is like segmenting and understanding the audience in that way, and then trying to build a content strategy that meets all the needs of those different groups.
That's really interesting. I think because, I mean, what you see a lot of B2B brands doing is, I guess one of the simplest thing how a lot of people start is like with something like this, right? That kind of interview podcast or something like that. But what do you recommend to people that kind of want to share knowledge? Do you see it more effective inviting people from the outside versus like sharing knowledge that they have in-house? I mean, I know at Vistia you did both, but you were, when I remember correctly, you had like a really strong video strategy also on actually creating videos where you share knowledge around the product and on creating videos specifically.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think you're right. I think you need to do both. You got to have the approach where you're kind of doing external stuff and you're doing stuff that's your own and you control as well. And you need both. You need that core asset that's yours, that you own, and you need to start engaging with other influencers and other people who can help spread the message as well. So I don't think it's a choice of one or the other. Usually it's about trying to come up with a bit of good content for both contexts.
But let's say I haven't really dabbled in videos much, and I'm kind of a B2B SaaS company. Where do you recommend starting? Is it like lower in the funnel, more like sales enablement stuff, or start building an audience? Like what? Because I mean, I've kind of been in those shoes myself, and I personally I started with webinars, because you kind of got in leads, and so you could show something. Because at the end of the day, in the beginning, you need some buy-in, and so you need to have some quick wins. So what have you seen working well?
Yeah, so I think for B2B SaaS, I would if you've not done videos before, you need to start with something like the hygiene stuff. So number one, your about us video, your like here's who we are thing, because that process of doing that video will force you to kind of answer some tough questions about your own brand and your own like who you are and how you want to present yourself. And it will also identify who are the main voices in your company and that kind of thing. So that's number one. Then do your product videos. So, you need one for each product page. You need one for each feature. And you need a video that sort of explains the value proposition again of each thing and does it very succinctly. And that creative process, that scripting process is much, much harder than you would think. It's much, much harder than writing a product page. You've got to get really good product marketing to do that. So I think those things stand you in very good stead from a product marketing standpoint and a broader video marketing standpoint. Once you've done that, then you can start to branch out and it becomes easy. So then start to do support videos, unbranded how-to videos, maybe for YouTube, the kind of building that audience that are maybe not familiar with who you are, but are just going to arrive and understand what you're about. And then you can start to build towards things like podcasts, longer form content, video series, whatever it might be that's going to have a bit more of a full brand intent and be there to kind of support your strategy from a brand perspective. So that's where I would go. Like start with the hygiene stuff and then move towards the things that are going to add more big picture brand value.
I love what you said about the kind of starting with the hygiene stuff, because a lot of the decisions that you need to make during the hygiene phase are coming up anyways later, right? Also like something simple like production value, like is it like but also is it like cool, is it like super professional, what is kind of the language and the tone of voice. I mean, these are all decisions that need to be made anyways, and so I like that notion. Have you seen when we talk about product features and stuff like that, I mean, obviously when you describe them in like a video, you're thinking like screen share, do you thinking like super simple like that, or higher production value with like animations and stuff like that? Because obviously like when you start out, you might want to do it as simple as possible, because otherwise you need to get more resources and stuff like that. So what have you seen works? Because I've seen both.
Yeah. Sure. So I would steer away from animation as much as possible. So there's I think a misconception: animation makes things easier to understand. Doesn't. Often it makes things way more complicated, and doesn't really add anything to your brand. Like if you are a SaaS company, your brand is your product and your aesthetic and your people. And the thing that makes people choose one SaaS product over another is that they trust that the creators of the product understand your problem better than the alternative option. That plus, price and features and whatever. But that's the main thing. It's like, I believe that this is the right product for me because these people understand my product. So you need, therefore, to get the people who've made it on camera to build that trust. So I would always go down the line of talking head. You can keep it really simple and, good product shots. So get nice product shots, people actually using the product on a laptop or whatever. Yeah. Not difficult to shoot. Just get a camera on the screen and set it up properly so that you're not getting glare and all that kind of stuff. And that's the way to do it. So you get a camera out and do it properly rather than worry too much about animation and screen share and that kind of stuff. You don't need to use expensive cameras. You can do it with an iPhone. It's just about trying to put your best foot forward about who you are from a brand perspective. And for a SaaS company, that is essentially the people and the product. So get that on screen.
Yeah, right. I mean, when I look back at my own journey, it was always difficult. We didn't have a product marketer. It was not that in at the time. So now it became more of a like staple within companies. But how do you get people in front of the camera that are maybe not that used to be in front of a camera if you need people? Whether that's, I guess with sales, it's a bit more common, but especially in product, I mean, I remember we had a bit of an issue at the time to actually have people speaking, whether that's on webinars or like exactly in product videos and stuff like that. How do you guide as a marketer? Like, how do you guide this kind of process for people who are not used to creating video?
Yeah, so I think it's about just like trying to meet them where they are with their journey. And as long as they're bought into improving, it's just about getting the right support for them. So that might be bringing in a director for a couple of days to help out, doing some training. So helping people understand how to be on camera effectively. I do quite a bit of that. So, it's about just understanding where people are, helping guide them through that initial fear and journey about what's going to happen next and what they can do on camera. And usually once you start the baby steps of doing a few things and building that confidence, you'd be amazed how quickly people who are a bit nervous can become very good. But they have to want to do it, right? It has to be someone who's like interested. And if you don't have anyone in your company that wants to do it, someone has to step up, because this is the new, like if you think about the way in which 5-10 years ago, it was always the question of, okay, well, who's going to speak on behalf of the company? And it was obviously very PR controlled. There's normally only one or two spokespeople. No one wants to do it. And now most companies out there have dozens of spokespeople in various different contexts. And now it's the same thing. It's like, well, now you need to start thinking about having more and more people on camera. And if you're not willing to take that step, you're going to get left behind by the companies that do. So you got to get used to it. And you got to get media training from people. Yeah.
I fully agree. I think it's B2B becomes also much more of a like people to people business. I think people are starting to realize that we're selling to people, and that they don't want to hear from companies, they want to hear from people. And so I like the aspect that you mentioned, that you can do the 80-20 of like teaching someone to get in front of the camera and like maybe also writing the script for them, and so they don't need to do everything themselves. Yeah. So I think that's a good way to start. One thing that I'd be interested in as well is how have you, for example, at Wistia, how have you, for more of the enterprise accounts or for larger accounts, used video for sales or sales enablement specifically?
So the way in which Wistia used video for sales when getting large accounts was often like one-to-one comms. So would make specific videos for individual accounts. And the sales team at Wistia have, quite a lot of experience doing that. And it became part of the expectation of a salesperson at Wistia is that you're on camera a lot. And that's what they did. And they still do. And there'll be fun videos that are made to entertain certain people and, build that rapport. And a lot of time and energy was put into that. And it was just deemed part of the work of the sales team. And because it was there, and there's a creative team at Wistia who are very good and always up for doing new things, the sales team had a good support that they could rely on the creative team to help them out. And it's kind of how it goes.
How do I have to imagine? Because I think like also the people listening are sometimes in this situation where they kind of want to help the sales team, but maybe they are not as experienced. Like, you mentioned like personalized video. Like, what is something that they can go to the sales team with and like, hey, try this in your next, maybe even in an email campaign or something like that when they do outreach anyways. Like, what have you seen has worked at Wistia or with other clients?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so when I was Wistia, we actually put together quite a bit of content on this topic, and there's a load on the Wistia blog, I think. So go have a look at the examples that were made, and there's steps on how you can go and actually make all that stuff, and go to it. So I would go down that route and think about how you can kind of apply some of those learnings to whatever you're doing. There's a tool that Wistia created called Soapbox, which is a free tool that you can use for B2B sales videos. There's a few others out there. Loom works. There's another one called Go Video, I think. So there's a few free tools out there. Just get started with those. You don't need any particular equipment or anything. But I would say that, for me, I think in sales, the outreach video that we saw a couple of years ago, everyone was doing that basic, hi, oh, sorry, I've just turned my camera off a mistake.
Actually, in the meantime, I can quickly also show you.
Yeah. So this was the one we put together, and so it's a great tool. You put it, you attach it to Chrome, and it allows you to create these like nice little videos with talking head and a screencast as well. So if you want to like share a screen and show what's going on, you can do that, and it looks great. So it looks a bit more professional than just a standard talking head video. But I think that's kind of the way I'd recommend it. I think I wouldn't go down the route of like these generic kind of just basic wavy hand view. If you're going to make a video as a salesperson, it has to add value. It can't just be for the sake of it. The gimmick is worn off. So I think if you're going to do like a screen share or something, or you're going to provide some extra information, that's great. That works.
Mm-hmm. And also like something that I have seen that works really well is when you do the hygiene stuff on the product and the product features and so forth, it helps the sales team a lot because they have like links to send to potential customers they're talking to. So so that's also kind of a form of sales enablement in that sense.
Yeah. The other thing as well is you can end up turning your sales inquiries into FAQ videos. So the sales team like get a lot of questions frequently. Then make videos about them, answer the questions, and then you've got these stock assets that you can send into sales emails as you go, which can save time as well as be a bit more engaging.
Yeah, right. So that's interesting because I feel like a lot of B2B SaaS companies, but also a lot of other companies they're starting with video more on the like audience level, right? Like the cool stuff, like podcasts and stuff like that. So when we go into that area, I mean, we kind of establish like, let's start bottom of the funnel. Let's try to eliminate the objections of people that are further down, that are already maybe qualified leads. But like, let's say we move further up the funnel, like what have you seen works to kind of gather some steam? I mean, you've done like highly shows with high production value at Wistia. I mean, almost like bingeable Netflix series style stuff. and obviously for a lot of companies that's not really something they can engage in. But like, have you seen like these typical podcasts working that are kind of long form, 1 hour, something like that, or like shorter ones? Like what do you recommend to start with?
Yeah, sure. So the thing that differentiates, in my view, the successful content from the not successful content has nothing to do with production value. Now, production value is really helpful. And if you are looking to improve and want to do something high level, please feel free to reach out to me, anyone, and I will, help get you started or put you in touch with the right people, or we can look at working together. However, the thing that really makes the difference is pitching something that really resonates with a specific target audience. So what I mean by that is that it is something that elevates a particular community and is the best internet for a group of people who are underserved by the wider general media. So think about something that is like so niche in terms of its focus and yet has a real clear focus that Netflix would never do it, but it really appeals to few people. Because in B2B, what you need to do is get the level of engagement that somebody has with Game of Thrones, but just for like 10 people who absolutely obsessed with that thing. So you're aiming to create just a few super fans, right? So what you have to do is create something completely unique and pitched very differently and very focused for that particular community. And the way you do that is first, you really understand what that community is about. And then you come up with an idea that feels a little bit more elevated than just a standard podcast. So the problem with podcasts is they all lack a value proposition. They're all framed as, here is a podcast about marketing, or here is a podcast about finance or sales or whatever. Like that doesn't tell me why I should care. I need to know from the name, from the pitch, what it is that I'm getting and why I should care. And that as a business, we have to get. You have to get the idea so cemented in the identity of the particular podcast framing that people who are going to be drawn to that, and you're only going after a very, very few people. So you target it super specific and you give it that hook, seem very different to everything else out there. And that's how you win. And it doesn't matter about how good the quality is. It matters how focused the idea is and whether it resonates with that target audience.
I think that's empowering though, right? Because I feel like a lot of people who don't have a lot of experience in video, they're kind of scared by like, oh, we need to have this like big studio or like, this big equipment. We don't know what to do and so forth. So, but like when you think about like creating this kind of show, have you seen B2B SaaS startups that have done a good job at that, like that have defined a great small niche and then went after it?
B2B SaaS, not as many as I'd hope, but I'm hoping to change that in the near future. So one that Whiskey talked about is Profitwell, who really focused on pricing, right? So they just made a whole thing about pricing pages and made a whole series about that. Very, very niche, very focused. So that's one example. You can think, but yeah, not so many B2B SaaS. It's not so. I think most of them have fallen into the trap of going a bit too generic. But if they want to be more focused, I think they'd fly a bit more.
Yeah, Profitwell does a great job.
They do a good job.
I mean, they even sometimes have like serious. I was in kind of I didn't join, but I was in a kind of nurturing stream of theirs where they just talked about for weeks on end about like how does it called in English, like when credit cards bounce, so just a very specific topic for retention marketers, right? And that's it. They just talked about that because they knew when the marketer solves this problem, they will have success with their product and in their function. Interesting.
Yeah, so it's like super nerdy and specific, right? But very, very high value content.
And outside of B2B SaaS, so you have examples that maybe B2B companies can learn from. And draw inspiration from where a niche or audience has been well defined and served.
In podcasts specifically? Or just in general? one that I love is a guitar shop near me in just south of London, and it is called Anderton's, and they do a whole series which is just like, if you were it's targeted at people who wish they were professional musicians, and it's basically like, if you were just given an ultimate budget in a guitar shop, what would you do? So just messing around, right? It's really silly. It's very playful. And their target audience are not the people who are going to buy the product, right? The target audience are the people who are going to talk about it and amplify it. And that in turn leads to people who actually end up buying loads of products. So that has worked very, very well for them. And that's a great example. So, yeah.
But that's a really interesting part. Can you talk a bit more about that? Because, oftentimes, even on the audience level, like people would think in terms of a funnel, right? You're like, oh, okay, so already the qualified people need to come from the top in. So can you talk a bit about that and go into more detail on this note?
Yeah, sure. So I think that the funnel idea that the B2B marketing funnel idea is very problematic in the language of audience building and brand marketing more broadly, because it doesn't really play, and it doesn't work, and it doesn't really help you, because the way in which you actually build an audience is not linear, and it doesn't fly in a funnel. And what matters in terms of word of mouth and your broader success is about people talking about you, and your target customers likely don't talk about you. So there's a differentiation there between the people who are going to talk about you and share your stuff and the people who are going to buy from you. And you need to create a different funnel, a different lens. I talked about this a little bit earlier, about like turning people from base level consumers into fans. That is like your brand marketing funnel that sits separately to your product funnel. And that's a separate kind of form of nurturing that is about building an audience. So your target audience for your brand content, like podcasts and video series, that content, it's different to your target customers. It's about communities. It's about people who are likely to amplify and share your stuff. The people who are going to be ultimate fans of a message, not necessarily fans of the product. So it's about having a different audience. And the challenge in the B2B world is that most people don't want to do that because they can't quantify it in terms of ROI. It's nice and simple when you have a funnel and you can kid yourself that everything you're doing has a monetary value, and you can go, oh, I'm putting this money into video and I'm getting this much out. No, that's never worked in any marketing ever. You've just had the data that you've been able to pretend and convince yourself that it is working like that. It doesn't. So you need to consciously say, okay, we're going to invest in brand, and we're going to measure it not based on money in, but we're going to measure it based on the amount of engagement we're getting with a certain community and the amount of amplification, knowing that this will in turn to revenue, but not be directly trackable. And unless you're willing to commit to activity that is not directly trackable, you cannot do brand marketing. And I think in the long term, you cannot succeed, because all good marketing relies on a lot of non-attributable stuff.
I think that's a really important point to make, because I feel like marketers became really, really obsessed with attribution and trying to, coming out of this like performance marketing where everything was trackable and attributable. And all these super elaborate attribution models and stuff like that. So I think this is a super important point to make, because when we are getting buy-in for something like a podcast, that also the expectation management is right? So that, we're not telling them like, hey, you're going to get like hundreds of MQLs or even SQLs through the aforementioned funnel. But it's more about like the general conversation that is going on about the brand in the industry.
Yeah, exactly. It's even broader than that. It's more just about how many people are spending time with you, because the stuff that really matters, particularly for B2B, but I think for B2C too, but it's more for B2B. It's about a few people spending a lot of time with you, and they become your advocates that really start to drive adoption over long term. And in any like B2B industry, there's normally a relatively small number of very high important influencers at the start. And those are the people that matter. And those are the people that are going to drive your brand over long term. And the irony about demanding ROI is, once you are successful as a business and you've built a good flywheel or a funnel, stuff's not trackable anyway, because most of your good leads come directly.
Right.
So
exactly.
you stop trying to demand trackable marketing only then to basically fall into a place where you can't track it, and admit that from the start, what you need to do is invest in a lot of activity that you can put metrics on that value it. You can track it and measure it effectively, but just not in terms of revenue. We were all lulled into a false sense of security about performance marketing, but it's never been true that you can really measure it all. And now we just have to accept that.
And it's interesting because I talked to a marketer from Gong. I don't know if you know them.
Not familiar.
It's like a sales software, and they took the B2C approach completely, right? I mean, they're basically like a B2C brand for salespeople, right? In a way. Yeah. And he told me that if they hadn't built such a strong kind of brand at the top where people just talk about like their brand and like the cool things they do, they would not be able to run a demand generation program the demand generation program that they do, because they just have like tons of people. And he said too, like they're not attributable to, directly, right? So, but still, like you as a marketer, even if you don't report it upwards to management or like wherever, you want to kind of gauge how well it's working. So what do you look at, like dwell time or like view time in terms of videos or like brand searches? Like what would people, like marketers who are actually doing it, look for?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you for feeding me the right answers. So I think the essential answer is brand search is your number one metric for like brand salience, right? So you need to see that going up over time. More people searching for you, more people searching for like brand modified queries. So your name plus type of product or whatever. So that really matters. And you want to also look at the character of those brand searches. Like, what are people associating with you? What are they thinking? In terms of the like affinity metrics, so the core, like, if you're doing long form content, at Wistia, we call that brand affinity marketing, that like people spending time with you. So dwell time, watch time, and particularly for video, it's like the number of videos they are watching to a certain degree. So what you then do is in your CRM system, you have a different level of tracking from leads, which is fans, right? And your fans is, okay, well, you're going to have levels of this that sits at like, okay, people who've watched like 2 videos, a little bit, are like, they're sort of engaged viewers, but not fans yet. Then you've got people who've watched like 5 videos and watched them all. They're like active. And then you get down to like, you sort of basically create these buckets that people can fit into. And your goal is to create the highest number of fans right at the bottom who have given you their email address, all these other permission assets, maybe even like, signed up to a course or something. They're on your newsletter, they're watching your content regularly, and you basically create this new marketing automation funnel that is based on fans rather than on leads, right? And that is how you build this audience long term, and that's how you drive that real brand value.
And we're not trying to close that group, if I understand you correctly. Like, it's not about that they ever buy the product necessarily, but it's an own fan funnel, if you want, and you kind of provide them with, with swag and with referral opportunities and I don't know, all this kind of stuff. Okay.
Yeah, your ultimate goal there is word of mouth, right? So what you want is these people to talk about you to lots and lots of other people. Now that is impossible to measure, and it always will be, I think. I hope. I don't really think we want that level of intrusion in our lives. So you have to use a proxy, right? And the proxy is like the level of engagement, and you just have to make that assumption that engagement equates to conversation, which it usually will, not always, but that's kind of the metric you're going for. So it's all about how do we create these fans who like you, talk about you, engage with everything you're doing, and your goal is to nurture those people into being even bigger fans and even bigger advocates, never to convert them to customers. That is a separate funnel. There will be crossover, but it's never the same one, because what you often find is that there'll be a huge number of people who are fans but never buy. And if you look at them as not valuable because they never buy, you miss out on all the value they're creating. So at Wistia, for example, there's an email list of about 500,000 people and only about 20,000 customers. So there's a real, but those 500,000 people really, really share the brand. And it's only because of that strength that the big customer base is allowed to fly. Like one enables the other, but they're different approaches.
And I mean, it's interesting if you look at like kind of concentric circles, and in the middle would be like employees, and then or like the founders, employees, and then like super fans and so forth. Like even I might not be that close to the core, but if I'm further out, like I talk about Wistia, right? If someone asks me like, what is a good B2B video platform, I'm like, oh, Wistia, I heard of Wistia. I didn't hear about all the others, right? And so even if I'm not like, yeah, exactly. And I think it's very granular, and nobody will ever be able to attribute my little recommendation that I gave you. You know, I didn't even think about it, right? It was like, oh yeah, Wistia, try them out, right? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I
always think with all measurement in marketing, like, you know, I love data and I love measurement, and I'm very passionate about it, but it's always about choosing the right proxy. It's never about trying to get to absolute certainty. And I think anytime you try and get to absolute certainty, you make very bad business decisions over the long term. Because demanding like clarity and measurement leads to bad strategy. If you're only willing to like have a sale that you can really attribute to a certain way, you're going to attribute it to PPC, you're going to attribute it to like direct sales, and you're going to like basically just increase your costs every time, because the most expensive stuff is the most trackable. It's not necessarily the most effective.
That's a good point. So I think like in terms of if we summarize, I mean, if we have not done any video whatsoever, we kind of start as close to the sale as possible, I guess. Or like, let's say around the product, bottom of funnel video. And only afterwards we kind of start thinking about podcasts that start building what I now, as of now, will call kind of these fan funnels, if you want. So okay, that's pretty cool. But this was a really interesting discussion. Is there, and like, what do you do today, and what can kind of people get from you? Like, what kind of advice do you give? What kind of strategies do you put together? Like, what's your specialty?
Yeah, sure. So I'm like right now basically consulting on B2B video marketing is my specialty. So I do some work with B2C companies as well, but at the moment kind of focusing more in that lens, and helping companies work out what to make, how to make it, how to distribute it effectively, and then how to measure it. And I'm covering all those kind of 4 bases and consulting on that for businesses. So it's my career at the moment.
Can we kind of refer people to any website or Twitter or LinkedIn?
Yeah,
or
sure. I do have a website there. I have a new one going live in a couple of days. It's philnottingham.com. Or you can just email me at philnottingham@gmail.com.
philnottingham@gmail.com. Okay, cool. Do you have anything that you want to leave the listeners with? Because this is also going to be a podcast, so you have the last word.
Sounds good. I think I would just say, with all things video, it's like, particularly in B2B, the 2 things are: 1, get your measurement straight up front, because if you do that and you get buy-in with all the relevant people, everything goes smoothly. The second one is like, start really small and don't worry about trying to get it all right at once. Like, it takes time to build your style, to understand how it works. So if you start with the hygiene stuff for your website, then everything else starts to flow and go easy from there. And then, you know, have a crack at doing some longer stuff, a podcast or a video series if you're so inclined. And always excited to see anyone doing good stuff. So if you've got something on the go, I'd love to hear about it. So please put it my way.
Cool. Phil, thank you very, very much for your time.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
I'll send you the podcast once it's ready. Cheers.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate your time.
Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.